Yesterday we had a phenomenal natural phenomena. We had a total eclipse of the sun, and it got me thinking this is a great opportunity to talk a wee bit of history about another total eclipse of the sun. In fact, the last one to be seen in the state of what we now know as Ohio. So the state of Ohio was actually formed, applied for and formed in 1803. The President of the United States at the time is Thomas Jefferson, and he's appointed William Henry Harrison as governor of the Indiana Territory. And he's given him a pretty basic task. He says, I want settlement of the area. I want the Indians gone at any cost. So Harrison starts a war of attrition with thousands of men, militia, full-time soldiers, and they rage through this native areas and they basically burn and pillage. Now, natives aren't familiar with this type of warfare. You're used to assigning certain warriors for certain applications in certain wars, and they're not used to a war of attrition where they're essentially being forced off their lands. Which brings me to two other characters that are going to play a role and to the story of how this total eclipse of the sun in 1806 played such an important role. The two characters I'm going to talk about are quite famous in our known history of the time period. So we have, and they're brothers. So we have Tecumseh and we have Lalawithika. And Lalawithika is Tecumseh's younger brother, and he's a crybaby at birth, and the name Lalawithika translated in English means noisemaker. Something that natives didn't have a lot of tolerance for. And he always lives under the shadow of Tecumseh. Tecumseh's the best hunter, Tecumseh's the warrior, he's the orator. And this leads Lalawithika to become a drunk. I mean a slobbering drunk. He at times doesn't know his name. And at one point, in a drunken stupor, he falls forward into the fire and he goes comatose. And they haul him out thinking they'll save his life, but they presume him dead to the point that they're actually making preparations for his grave when he comes back to life. And during this period, it's transformational for him. He sees or has a vision or a dream that alcohol is the demise of the native people, that they need to move away from European cultures, their clothing, their ways, give up alcohol. And he tries to persuade the people. And because of the fact that he literally rose from the dead in the natives' mind, and they're very superstitious, they give him the name the prophet. And the story just gets a lot more interesting from here on in. It's worth noting that the population in this Ohio region and Illinois region, it has mushroomed from about 44,000 to 220,000 people. And they're encroaching all the time in every direction on this native territory. And Tecumseh sees that if natives can't get past their adversarial approach to one another and form a coalition, in other words, not be Delaware or Shawnee or Ottawa or whatever, that they would become Native Americans and fight to preserve their very way of life. And he gets this idea of traveling and using the prophet, now that he's getting so much esteem with other native groups, that he could actually bring together all these tribes and defend this last remaining bit of native ground. Yeah, so off he goes on a journey. And we think of a journey today. I'm about to go off to Prickett's Fort, to the School of the Long Hunter. I made a wee pipe here that I'm going to put on their auction table. And in modern times, this isn't much of a journey at all. But Tecumseh actually travels over the years. He's going to travel north and south from the Gulf of Mexico to as far north as Montreal in Canada, spreading the word. And he's trying to develop this coalition. At the same time, the prophet's back there. Now, I believe Tecumseh's feeding him the stuff he wants him to say and when to say it. And now this comes to the attention of Harrison. And he realizes that this could be a lot of trouble for him. and back to his task of making this land available for settlers, he realizes that if Tecumseh is able to bring this all together, he's got a lot of problems. So he puts out interestingly, he puts out a challenge to the prophet to try to discredit him. Uh, and it's quite a challenge, and that's where the eclipse of June the 16th, 1806 comes into my wee bit of a story today. Now Harrison, he's a Christian fellow, and he thinks he'll put out this challenge to the prophet, again, to discredit him. So he sends an open letter to the Delawares, and he goes, "Well, listen, don't listen to this guy. If he's truly a prophet, then let him show us that he's able to do things that are of biblical proportions." So, and this isn't verbatim, but he essentially says to in the letter, he says, "Let the prophet stop the sun in the sky, or make the moon alter its course, make the rivers stop flowing, let the dead rise from the dead." And he puts that challenge out. Now, Tecumseh and the prophet, they got a problem because they got to deal with this challenge, or they're going to lose credit. They're going to lose face with this coalition that Tecumseh is so desperately trying to form. And so they counsel, and it's still a mystery as to how they predicted it. If you believe in prophecy, did they have an almanac? Did Tecumseh was well read? He was versed in many languages. He could read and write English. Was he aware of this and fed the information to the prophet? We'll never know that. But the prophet comes out, and in front of all the people gathered, he says, "In 50 days, in the middle of the day, the sun will quit shining, the sky will go dark, the birds will go to roost." And, well, lo and behold, if that doesn't happen. And much to the chagrin of Harrison, because he goes, "Wow, I put this challenge out. I'm sure this was going to work," and they'd lose all their following. But now he's buffered them up. Now people start flocking to the prophet to hear his words. At the same time this is happening, Tecumseh's back out in his journeys, visiting all the native tribes. The next part of my story, and it's far more phenomenal than that prediction. To this day, geologists still marvel at Tecumseh's prediction. And the prediction I'm talking about is called the Madrid Earthquake. It's centered in Illinois, where the Missouri and the Ohio River meet the Mississippi River. And the shock waves from this earthquake are felt from Montreal to New Orleans, the entire eastern half of the North American continent. And it does some pretty crazy things. So we have rivers run backwards. The Mississippi ran backwards for about 6 hours. It forms a lake called Reelfoot Lake in the state of Tennessee that's 18 miles long that didn't exist before it. It's the biggest earthquake to ever happen in known history in the North American continent. And Tecumseh not only predicts it, he predicts it to the very day. And again, we see this coalition now are going, "Wow, the prophet, these predictions, this is good medicine." And they start to form this strong coalition of a native army that are going to start working together to defend their last remaining remnants of their territorial lands. And this is all leading up to the War of 1812. Now, the natives didn't call it the War of 1812, they called it the Red Stick Wars. So when Tecumseh's making his journey, he takes along bundles of sticks, and he does this sort of traditional thing where if he takes one stick out of the bundle and snaps it over his knee, he breaks it. But he says if we put the bundle all together and he tries to break it, he hands it to some of the bigger natives who try to break it, and they can't. And he's trying to get across to them all, if we can come together, we are strong. As individual tribes, we are very weak and easily broken. And when he's making the prediction of the Madrid earthquake, he says, on the day that the earthquake takes place, you take one stick out of the bundle. So he leaves a certain number of sticks with each tribe. You take one stick out of the bundle for every moon that passes. When all the sticks are done, we're going to congregate. And that is the start of the War of 1812. The first battle, by the way, takes place Michilimackinac area. And he also left him with this. Now, this is a self bow that I made a number of years ago. Sadly, I can't remember what all the symbols mean, but it was code, because like any war, there are spies. So the natives had spies within their groups. So the symbols would mean something to European Anglo-Saxon people, would mean one thing, but to natives they meant another. And the top symbol is when the earth shakes. And that's when they start to take the sticks into the bundle, where they all get together, they congregate, and the Red Stick War begins. And yeah, I just find that a fascinating bit of history that whether you're a believer in prophecy or not, there are a lot of scientists to this day that look at Tecumseh's prediction and, as I mentioned, just marvel at the fact that he was able to do that. So that is a short, very short wee bit of history. I once had the privilege of portraying Tecumseh at a historic event in a museum. And before people start getting too upset about cultural appropriation, I was invited to do this. It was supported by a number of Ojibwe elders. In fact, they participated in my presentation. Essentially, a group of the elder women were seated on a buffalo robe, and I had to approach them because it's a matriarchal society. And I had to essentially, playing the role of Tecumseh, approach them to get their permission for their men, their boys, their husbands, their grandchildren to go to war against the Long Knives in the War of 1812. It was an honor to do that, and I mean no disrespect in my role as Tecumseh. It was a learning experience because I did a tremendous amount of research leading up to that. The story I've passed on to you today is a very brief bit of the whole history that took place in that turbulent time in history. Yeah. There can be no doubt that Tecumseh and Harrison were enemies, and Tecumseh had absolutely no respect for Harrison, or for that matter, Americans in general. But it wasn't the same from Harrison's perspective. And I normally don't read things, but when I try to do things verbatim, I usually screw it up. So I'll leave you with a quote, a tribute, if you would, that Harrison wrote in 1811 to Tecumseh. And he says, "The implicit obedience and respect which the followers of Tecumseh pay to him is really something astonishing, and more than any other circumstances bespeaks him one of those uncommon geniuses which spring up occasionally to produce revolutions and overturn the established order of things."